To talk about these developments involving women in the church, we're joined by a distinguished panel. Dr. Pia de Solenni is a moral theologian and expert on issues related to women's health, new feminism, and culture. And attorney Mary FioRito, who's joining us once again, is a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and a director of its Catholic Women's Forum. Thank you both for joining us today. Pia, let's start with you. Talk to me about the Vatican announcement on women and the Synod on Synodality. For the first time, lay women and religious will have an opportunity to express their opinions with a vote about the future of the church. How significant is this?
Thanks for having me on, Montse. It's largely a symbolic move, I think, on the part of the Holy Father, because the Synod it's a consultative body. So the vote doesn't really carry any weight at the end of the day. The Holy Father will make his own decisions, will write his own document. So it's a symbolic gesture. At the same time, I really want to hesitate. I think we're so caught up in women having roles in the church that we miss the broader call of both men and women to be present as the body of Christ in the world. And I think that's really where our focus needs to be.
It always makes me think of someone like Mother Cabrini, who was so powerful outside of the Vatican walls. And I think that's significant and maybe the point that you're making. Mary, now the matter of these dueling letters from two different groups of Catholic women with differing views on abortion, one that's faithful to the church teachings and one that is not. This letter from Catholic healthcare professionals was addressed specifically to the women who signed the original letter from university professionals. Why was it addressed to them as a response and not to the broader Catholic community?
Well, what the medical professionals who signed the letter wanted to do was to respond to the request that the original letter put out, which was a call for a more inclusive dialogue about abortion and specifically about the Catholic Church's teaching on abortion. And they seemed to direct their letter mostly towards the bishops, but they mentioned male hierarchy, et cetera, and compassionate clergy, as I suppose, contradicting church teaching as well. It wasn't a very clear letter in terms of the way it was formatted. And as I read through it the first time, I thought, my goodness, this sort of reads like a Planned Parenthood press release if Planned Parenthood were going to be writing for a religious audience. So it was a little sort of muddled in its format. And what the doctors and nurses and nurse midwives who put together this response really wanted to do was to engage about what abortion really is, because it's difficult to have a conversation about abortion law, abortion policy, how abortion affects women without talking about what abortion is and what it does.
That's right. Now, Pia, you're a moral theologian, and Pope Francis last year asked theologians to consider the reality of the person in need in their responses. How does that instruction lead you to consider the issue of abortion?
I think this is completely on the heels of St. John Paul II, who talked about the lived experience. So we can't have moral debates that are abstract. We always have to think about who's involved. And so what I find, particularly in the abortion debate, if you listen to the women that are faced with these difficult decisions, if you look at the data from both sides, both people who support abortion and people who are against it, women who face abortions usually feel as if they have no choice but an abortion. And so if we're taking into account who she is and what she's experiencing, don't we really want to help her feel like she has the possibility to make some real choices, that she's not just forced into one, that her needs can be met, that actually somebody will be there to accompany her through this difficult time? There's so many resources that can be put into place and that can be mobilized. But if we're just going to the question of, well, abortion is the answer, then we're really not looking at the lived situation of that woman. Instead, we're saying, guess what? You're right. What you feel that you have no choice but to have an abortion. That's the reality. That's all we're offering you.
And Pia, you just used a key phrase in the beginning of your answer. You said listening to women. And the issue of women in these discussions was brought up in this letter. It was suggested in the open letter on abortion and reproductive justice that these discussions on women and life have been had without women, and that the issue of courage was brought up, that was what might be necessary, but that they just weren't fostered in an environment to be able to be heard. What can you say about that?
I feel so honored to be part of a huge group of women that I know exist throughout the world who have been having these conversations, participating in them, both with the hierarchy in the church and outside of the church with secular society. So I think that we've been making tremendous accomplishments, and I think we have to continue with this trajectory and involve the voices of more women. I think that we've been, in many cases, particularly on the pro-abortion side, we're hearing from women that have they're siloed and they have an agenda. And yes, those of us who are against abortion, who are pro-life, yes, we have an agenda, but we are much more open to just the way that God's will plays out in someone's life, the way that somebody's life, it may not fit a checklist of what a perfect life looks like. And yet we're willing to work with that, and we're willing to help people and meet them where they are. But I think that women have been engaging, and I'm so honored to be part of that and to have seen this. And there were decades of women doing this long before I came along. So there's a long trajectory here that we're part of.
A trajectory of women who were courageous before it was cool to be courageous. Mary, this expansion of Medicaid that's suggested, you've come on our show and talked to our viewers about policy surrounding being pro-life. These staggering numbers on maternal health and mortality in the U.S. were also raised, noting that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention warns about the mortality rate for women of color in particular. What is the pro-life movement doing to address this?
Well, the authors of that original letter are quite right. The United States has an abysmal record on maternal mortality, and especially in communities of color. But abortion is not going to change that. We've had 50 years of abortion on demand in the United States, and that only increased the maternal mortality rate. It didn't decrease it. And one of the reasons why there is such a high rate among women of color is that they tend to have higher rates of hypertension than other women. They tend to seek medical care much later in their pregnancies. I have an OBGYN friend who is Black herself and who works primarily with women of color. And she told me once, if women show up in their 6th month of pregnancy for their first prenatal appointment, if they have issues that could threaten their lives, there's not a lot I can do at that point going forward. I need to see that woman in the first trimester, ideally within the first couple of weeks of finding out that she's pregnant. So, the access to better prenatal care, access to community care is really critical. If you look at, some of the worst neighborhoods in Chicago, there tend to be quite a few abortion clinics scattered throughout those neighborhoods, many of them within walking distance for most people. But, we had a situation on Chicago's South Side when a Catholic hospital wanted to open up sort of a freestanding urgent care. And because it wasn't going to be providing abortions and giving out contraception, some of the others in the community from, white people, wealthy people from other communities objected to the city giving the license to this particular Catholic hospital. Those kind of things have to stop. We cannot make abortion and contraception in these communities hinge on whether or not the women get the other health care that they need, whether they can get that hypertension care, whether they can get, weight management counseling and nutrition advice and real care for the mother and the child together. And, that's something, if the women who wrote this original letter are serious about that, about partnering for real good maternal comprehensive care for women, we're all in for that. We want to see healthy women having healthy pregnancies.
Absolutely. Pia, knowing that 1 in 4 American women has been affected by abortion, how do we have that conversation? And are pro-life women who do regret those abortions, or women who haven't had an abortion but understand this and with compassion, are they welcome into this conversation?
They're absolutely welcome. And I think that we need to always be honing the way in which we have these conversations, making sure that we're approaching them not from a judgmental standpoint, but are we really ready to encounter them? The pro-life movement has done so much to help women with healing after abortion. This can only grow. And I think that particularly if our pastors and our priests or clergy throughout the movement of various Christian denominations are equipped and ready to talk about this, because again, the starting point is that most women who have abortions feel as if they have no choice but to have an abortion. That's the starting point. So we have to start there and help people begin to navigate either a decision that they're considering or a decision that's already been made and that they regret. I mean, I had a friend who joked that, nobody really comes out about their abortion. Now, some of the activists do, but by and large, that's something that, I've had medical doctor friends tell me, we can't even get this information from our patients unless we word the questions in a particular way. So this is something that women are not comfortable with. We've got to find more and more ways to meet women where they're at, and to be that listening witness of the encounter that Pope Francis speaks about so eloquently.
It's such an important thing and so necessary. Mary, this letter invites all women into this conversation. Will the Ethics and Public Policy Center do something specific to reach out to the signers of the original letter to start a dialogue?
Well, we've already done that. We, again, as you noted, as we started our conversation, Montse, we addressed the letter directly to them. And we end it by saying, we hope to hear from you. And we do. We mean that genuinely. Again, the only way we're going to, arrive at some consensus as an American public, not just among women, but as we see these, these bills and laws being debated state by state, is if we arrive at a consensus among what the American people want, and we have to square it with the science. And that's what the doctors and other professionals were trying to point out in this letter. We have a number of neonatologists who signed it, who mentioned the fact that, viability continues to decrease. Now we're looking at about 21, 22 weeks for fetal viability. I mean, the Sandra Day O'Connor, who was a justice of the Supreme Court, once wrote, Roe versus Wade is on a collision course with itself, because as we do more amazing things with fetal surgeries that are performed at 16 weeks. There was a successful brain surgery on an unborn child that was just made public. The letter from the original signers about reproductive justice doesn't mention anything about justice for that child, who's often pain capable. And if we are going to have a conversation as Catholic women who claim to follow the Lord, we know from the Didache, which is the very first manual of Christian discipline that was written by the first followers of Jesus, it explicitly condemned abortion by name. Right. In a Roman Empire where it was widely practiced. So we know that abortion was incompatible with the teachings of Christ, and it was absolutely unfathomable to Christ's first followers. So we need to take that gospel mandate seriously. And when we're talking about pregnancy and women, we're talking about two lives. There's a medical and ethical obligation to treat both the mother and the child. That's why obstetrical textbooks refer to the unborn child as the second patient. We want to love them both. We want to care for them both. And we know from studies done on women who have had abortions, the majority of them say, I had an abortion because there was no one to support me. It wasn't because of all these other reasons. It was because no one would accompany them and walk with them. I think that's an area where we can all agree that if a woman doesn't have someone to go to her appointments with her, to call her every other day just to check in on her and see how she's doing, I think we can all agree that if a woman makes that choice to have a child, that we should be there to support her if she's alone, and especially if the baby's father has abandoned her.
Absolutely. It looks like there are many points of departure for this great discussion. Well, thank you both. Thank you both for this, and I hope that they take you up on that offer, Mary, and Pia will be looking for your analysis and guidance as we approach the Synod as well. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.